Well, I don't believe populism is a corrective or a threat to democracy in and of itself. I really believe it really depends on whether it renew or threaten democracy. Really depends on the very specific social, cultural, economic context in which populism emerges, in which populism develops. And you know, traditionally there's been in the scholarly literature 3 main ways of talking about populism, either as an ideology, as a discourse, or as a strategy. And this, of course, has implication for the way we interpret populism and the way we understand its impact on democratic life. So if we look at populism as an ideology, so as a set of interrelated ideas about politics and society, populism really becomes an interpretative framework in which you basically delineate more or less precisely distinction between, on the one hand, the people, and on the other hand, the elite. But as Cas Mudde, who wrote a lot on populism, was saying, populism is a thin-centered ideology. That means that its ideational commitments are sparingly defined. So it can be populism can be the vessels of very different ideological streams, from the radical left to the radical right. So populism as an ideology is perhaps too ethereal to really define. But if we look at populism as a discourse, that would be a kind of a different perspective. It would be a way of making claims about politics, so a rhetoric that will construct, this us versus them, so this elite against, or rather the people against the oligarchy. And if we have this perspective also, we can see that the us versus them is very adaptable. It can take on a variety of meanings, and it's not necessarily, let's say, it's not a fixed essence, right? And as a strategy, it will be more a form of mobilization, a form of organization. So as a strategy, it will be a way to galvanize the citizenry to foster political change. But yet again, this can be used for both inclusionary aims and exclusionary aims. It really depends, again, how we define the people. So I don't think that populism is really a threat to democracy, because it's not necessarily democracy that they criticize, it's more the principle of representation. And they try to put forward other techniques, other methods, other ways through which participation could be increased, such as referendum, local democracy, etc. What, however, I think is way more detrimental to democracy is what I call anti-populism. Anti-populism, which is being abundantly, mobilized by editorialists, by pundits, and by centrist politicians. And what I'm trying to do in my paper is that I'm trying to basically to turn upside down the logic and to try to use the 3 frameworks used for analyzing populism, so strategy, discourse, and ideology, to study what anti-populism means. So if we take the discursive standpoint, anti-populism refers to the use of the label populist. And whenever the label populist is used, it's always in a derogative, pejorative, derogatory manner. It's always aimed at excluding, marginalizing, excluding from political decency, basically. And the way, so it's exclusionary. It does not, those who use this label are excluding what they consider to not be viable, to not be valuable on ideological grounds. So that's an exclusive kind of perspective. If we look at anti-populism as a strategy, it is actually used a lot by the centrists because their policies are exhausted. So the only way they can maintain themselves to power is to actually position against. So they're always presenting themselves as the guardians of liberal democracy, as the frontiers against the far right or the far left of those who threaten liberal democracy. But by doing this, and this is quite ironic, they are actually employing the exact same, they are co-opting the methods of the populists that they supposedly hate. They are using false dichotomies. So they're always saying, we're witnessing a strife between reason against emotion, between expertise versus demagogy. The new frontier is not left-right, it's rather progressive versus nationalist. So it's always, it's us or the chaos. And this is, of course, completely very problematic for democracy because it restricts really the range of options that are available to the citizenry. It's very anti-pluralist in a way. And lastly, anti-populism can be seen as an ideology. And basically, I'm trying to rely a little bit on Roland Barthes to try to understand that. So I'm using this image of the myth to see that populism has been erected somehow as a myth, as a system of representation, as a mode of signification that symbolically excludes certain options from political respectability. And more tacitly, you have the idea, of course, as an ideology of anti-populism, that the popular classes are incompetent when it comes to the democratic process, that people-centric discourses are always irresponsible, irrational, chaotic. And this paves the way, of course, for elite domination. And in this last instance, I think that we can see that anti-populism is actually a scornful ideology.